The augmented fifth. The best way to understand this interval is to start with the whole tone scale. One of the whole tones will always look too big. Now we want to form an interval that is 4 tones or 2 bitones. I call this interval a quad for very good reasons. You simply start on a key and then you go up 4 tones. Sometimes these tones will look even, but sometimes not. The augmented chord actually gets its name from the traditional augmented fifth interval. However, it will frequently look like it has a minor sixth. Both the augmented fifth and the minor sixth are what I call a quad. The augmented chord, as it is used today, does not augment anything. It is simply its own sound. Here is an augmented chord written the way it is normally taught traditionally. It has 2 major thirds and an augmented fifth. Here is an example of how to use this form when going to the next chord. Here is that same augmented chord written the second way. This time it has a diminished fourth on the bottom and a major third on the top. And the big interval is now a minor sixth. Here is an example of how to use this form when going to the next chord. Finally, here is the same augmented chord written a third way. This time it has a major third on the bottom and a diminished fourth on the top. The big interval once again is a minor sixth. And here is an example of how to use this form when going to the next chord. Now comes the rabbit hole. There is nothing augmented about an augmented chord. As is true of so many other things about traditional music, the terms that we are still teaching today go way back in history and should have been updated a long time ago. A better name for the augmented chord would be the quad chord. It is always one bitone stacked over another bitone. And when I teach it this way, my youngest students are able to do it immediately in all 12 keys. Anytime we stretch a chord to another chord, we could say that we are augmenting it, because augmenting it simply means making it bigger. But only this one chord gets the name augmented. You actually don't get to it by augmenting anything most of the time. You can get to this chord in any manner from any other chord using a method I call morphing. Morphing just means changing something by 1/2 tone. Or you can go to the so-called augmented chord and use it with no preparation. Then there is the problem of traditional interval names. Even if we examine the simplest form of this chord with 2 major thirds, those 2 major thirds add up to an augmented fifth. What kind of math is this? How does 3 plus 3 equal 5 in any sane universe? When we examine the other look, which is a major third plus a diminished fourth, those 2 intervals add up to a minor sixth. So now we have 3 plus 4 equaling 6. This bizarro mathematical system is insane, and 3 of the intervals in the alternate spelling of the augmented chord are major, minor, and diminished. Remember that the traditional form had an augmented fifth. So in the same augmented chord, we have a major interval, a minor interval, a diminished interval, and an augmented interval. Music really is rocket science, but when it is presented this way, it is impossible to understand. On the other hand, if we simply call this augmented chord a quad chord, then everything makes logical sense. The chord itself spans 4 tones. All the intervals in the chord are bitones and quads. The math is clear and consistent. So if any of you are teaching, I can't recommend enough to teach this concept the way I teach it as a first step, using my names and my logic. When a student masters how to play this chord, you can then teach the nightmare of traditional names later.